What's up, y'all? This is John from the One Carolina Show. Just wanting to tap in, man, talk about what I saw in the preseason game. I know a lot of y'all saw, the game. A lot of us were tweeting back and forth. One quick update. I will be back soon making videos in the studio doing things the way that I normally do them. At the moment, just kind of been dealing with some personal stuff, some family stuff, or whatever like that. But things are, on the up and up, so we good. But just wanted to kind of cover, what I saw today, my thoughts and my thoughts and sentiments are a lot like what you guys think. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are major concerns in my opinion. Now, I know that it's preseason, and I know a lot of people would be like, man, it's vanilla. Now, like Smitty said something, for example, that I agree with wholeheartedly. He said, these teams are around each other. They've been around each other all week, joint practicing. I think it was like right around the time that Plummer had threw a pick. And he was like, they've got to do the best that they can to try to surprise them because they're not going to show too much on offense, right? And Brad Isaac was calling offense, not to mention that, right? But you got to try to do your best to just fool them as best you can. But they're basically running very similar concepts. But here's where the problem lies. If that's true, then we have a very serious problem when it comes to energy and effort. You know what I'm saying? And it just feels to me like if you're a player on this team, like some of the new players are going to follow what some of the older players are going to do. Like I felt like Derek Brown set a really good example. Dave Canales said, hey, Derek came to me, begged me for some reps. I didn't necessarily want him to play, but he came to me and was like, nah, I really want to play. And you can see the difference. You can see the difference early on. Like that first drive with Derek, you know what I'm saying? They were kind of pressuring the backfield a little bit, stopping the run pretty well, stuff like that. So you could see where things can turn around with having like real good players and having guys that have energy and effort. But then once those type of guys kind of get off the field, it seems like everything just kind of goes away. The pass rush becomes non-existent. I mean, it's pretty much non-existent, regardless, even when Derek was on the field, right? But I just feel like if this is ever truly going to turn around for us, it's got to be the guys, because I do think that there's something to be said for, I don't want to say Dave Canales is just the aw shucks guy, right? It does kind of feel like that at times. But remember, guys, when Matt Rule was fired, when Phil Snow was fired, and Steve Wilkes took over, Al Holcomb started calling defense. Man, Steve Wilkes is a man's man. I've always said this. I've always felt like it's easier for you to tone down being overly aggressive than for you to be passive aggressive and start getting hype. So if Dave was to turn around, and I'm not in those rooms. I'm only going off of what I see on the field. I'm going off what I see on the sidelines. But if Dave is in that room, and maybe it will take a little bit of a little more aggressiveness to try to get through to some of these guys about the effort. Because it's not just today, man. Getting outscored 50-13 in 2 preseason games, it's just, this stuff is not going to win us games at all. It's not, right? And I'm not saying that I'm really caring so much about the box score, but more about what are we seeing being put on film? You know what I'm saying? And far be it from me, I get it. I'm a content creator. I'm nobody special when it comes to any kind of, voice outside of just, a fan of this team. So it's hard for me to try to gauge the effort of some of these guys that are getting paid millions of dollars. Some of them, wanting to be paid millions of dollars, they can get opportunities. And we did see a few of those guys out there, putting forth maximum effort. But then a lot of it was just man, maybe the highs of how well you done in the camp practice or whatever like that, the joint practice, kind of set you back a little bit to think we could probably just go out here with ease. The Texans really showed up to play. I had this debate. I don't know if you guys watched my boy Lowe from the pregame podcast, but I was on his podcast this past Thursday, and he was like, hey, man, what do you think is more important, the preseason or joint practices, like the games or joint practices? And we kind of landed on both. But my choice, because I had to make a choice, was the game. Why? Because you play in a league of, it's like a fraternity. So it's like a gentleman's, kind of understanding, look, we ain't going to blow each other up in practice. You know what I'm saying? Like you could see a few times where, guys kind of let up when they could have just absolutely, leveled Stroud on a sack or, Bryce on a coverage sack or whatever that looks like. But then when the game turns on, it's like, all right, well, now we out here. Now we can really get to it. So that's why I think the game intensity is extremely important, right? So, there's some things that we got to clean up. Y'all know that. I know that. Nick Scorton, man, prayers up to him. Crazy to hear that he actually collapsed the lung. That is dangerous and scary at the same time. So definitely prayers up to him. Jalen Coker was sick. I saw somebody tweet this. It is really interesting how different this offense looks when Jalen Coker is on the field. I've often said myself, that he could be vying for wide receiver too. I know that might make some people upset. You can do with that what you will, but that's just, production is production, right? Seeing guys like Jimmy Horn not really get a good opportunity because he just can't get the ball. You know what I'm saying? Like I think that's one of the most underserving things about this whole scenario. It's just like, I'm watching the Raiders in San Francisco play and, some of these other teams around the league that have like, a little bit more quality and solid backups, playing. So these guys that are either fringe roster guys or guys that will make the roster, but you would just like to see good reps, they're not really getting that opportunity. There was a few times where I saw Jimmy Horn like wide open. And sometimes, yes, it would be because the pressure's getting to the quarterback, so there's really nothing that can be done there. But a couple of times it was like wide open and it would go to a check down. You know what I'm saying? So it's unfortunate. I don't think Jimmy's in any threat of not making this roster because the one thing that I do know that showed itself today is that there is nobody on this team that has that kind of speed that can be that disruptive on the field at any given time. And they're going to take advantage of that because that route by McMillan, if he gets hit by Andy Dalton, he literally walks into the end zone. I saw what made me fall in love with McMillan was watching, obviously, that first Arizona versus, I believe, New Mexico game. It was the first game of their season last year. And I want to say he had like 3, 4, maybe even 5 touchdowns in that game and like almost 300 yards, right? And there was one play where it was a very similar route. And he the same thing, made the dude fall, and he literally walked into the end zone. And we almost saw that in real time. And I'm telling you, the internet would have, like my boy, Real Ball Watcher, had put that out there, a clip of that, right? If he actually makes that play happen, the internet explodes, right? So that's the kind of stuff that I'm waiting for. Like, you want to see that kind of stuff, man. Like, we just have not seen anything like that in Carolina in quite some time, for the exception of, like, when it don't count, right? With house money. For as great as the Atlanta game was, you know what I'm saying? Man, I'm old enough to remember, Matt Moore going down the stretch, winning like 2 or 3 games, down the stretch some years ago when he's playing with house money and we're all excited, like, yeah, man, this is going to be great. And then the next season, it's like, nah, we 2-14. You know what I'm saying? And it's just, I'm sick of it. As a fan, as a content creator, as somebody who bleeds processed blue, I'm tired of it, man. Like, and I know, look, I get it. It's just the preseason. I understand that. But it was just the preseason last year. It was just the preseason the past 7 years, right? I do believe that there's a correlation with what you see effort-wise on the field to what you get from the players, like in general. Y'all might have saw a little thing there with my phone percentage is down, so you might not have heard that last part. But regardless, I'm interested to see what happens in this next game. Now, I know that the starters aren't going to start, right? But, man, Andy Dalton, it's weird to see somebody that has had as much success as he's had in the league regress like this. Lowe made a joke when we was talking this past Thursday. He like, man, Dalton just out here for the vibes, bro. You know what I'm saying? And I'm really starting to believe that. And it's just like, how can you justify getting good reps for these guys if this is what you're putting on the field? It's not, I hate to say this, it is not fair for some of these guys. But I don't know, man. But we're not going to see Bryce. We're not going to see any of the ones. We might see some of the young receivers. We might see some of the young pass rushers. I also think, and just kind of saying this sidebar, I think roster cuts are going to start coming out. We're going to probably, I would even say this week, probably see some guys that'll, possibly be out of here. Like I know a lot of people thought like, man, why did you see Shamar Bartholomew over Corey Thornton early on? Because I think Corey Thornton has solidified himself as potential cornerback 3. I mean, I know Shaw Smith-Wade would technically be that because he would be the nickel corner. But, I mean, I really like Mike Jack, but you might have just found an absolute diamond in the rough. And, the play on the field, all I know is this. If Mike were to get hurt for any reason and he gets that job, there may be a chance he never sees the field again for us, right? And that as a starter. And Mike's a good player. Mike had an extremely high PFF grade last year. Mike was one of the few bright spots on this team pretty much the entire season. It wasn't just, down the stretch when the team started kind of, playing a little bit better. So you don't want to necessarily see a guy like that lose opportunity. But at the same time, it's like, hey, if this guy's there and you see what we seen today and has seen the whole preseason, it'd be hard to justify him not getting opportunity on the field is all I'm saying, right? And maybe that happens in rotation. Now, not at nickel because obviously that wouldn't work. But you know what I mean. But guys like Shamar Bartholomew, I think he's really playing more because it's like this is kind of your last audition. You know what I'm saying? Like Jimmy Horn Jr. didn't get, a lot of reps. Bryson Tremaine, was out there with the ones. Bryson Tremaine was out there again with Andy. I think that even with him, for as great as he showed, what he's shown on tape and in the, in the practices and stuff like that. And he had a, pretty big play in this game. Bigger play than, I think pretty much anybody would have had outside of Sanders, who dropped a pass, right? Or a pass went through his hands. I think this was more a dress rehearsal for those guys. Like, hey, y'all are fringe. I think Jimmy Horn, I think he's a lock personally. I just don't see a world where, with what he has to offer speed-wise, with what he has to offer on the, punt and kick returns, I don't see a world where he's not on this roster. So I really do believe the reason that he was so far down on the depth chart today and, the reps way later in the game is because some of those other guys needed to get chances to show what they can do. And, those cuts that are going to be made earlier, it's like, okay, well, if we put you out there in situations where you may likely play during the regular season, we need to see what that looks like, and if you can't cut it, then, hey, this week's the week. So you got your opportunity. Here we are, and it's an unfortunate part of this business because some of these guys I believe could develop into good players, but you can't keep everybody. So it's, just kind of par for the course. But either way, I'd like to know what y'all think. I'm excited and I'm kind of, on one hand, looking at it like, well, Brad isn't calling plays. Yes, it is the preseason. We've seen, man, you would have thought that the Pittsburgh Steelers were going to be the most high-flying offense in the league at one point, watching Kenny Pickett and George Pickens go crazy a couple of years ago, and neither one of those guys are on that team anymore, right? So it is not a, guarantee that any of this stuff pans out when it comes to, preseason success. Like, it doesn't always correlate. And I do think that there are some, advantages and benefits that you can't take away from the joint practices. But I do also think that a sense of urgency, and again, as I mentioned earlier, I just feel like there's got to be yes, the players have to be the ones to control the environment. I like guys like Nick Scorton. Nick Scorton is aggressive. You know what I'm saying? Lathan Ransom is aggressive. Those type of guys, Derek Brown, those are going to be your guys that if the coach can't reach the player, the head coach, because you got guys in that building that are on the staff that are, pretty loud. Darren Bates is a guy that will, kind of get up and get active. But it seems like he may be one of the only ones. And I think you need to see more. When T-Mac caught that ball against Cleveland, I seen him come from nearly the bench where the players were sitting, flying through players and screaming, yelling, in T-Mac's face, hyping them up or whatever. And it's like, man, I'm not saying you got to have everybody on that type of energy because some people, like the quarterback, need to kind of have a little bit more hyper focus. But I do believe that you got to have some guys that are like a little more strict. And I believe Dave has that in him. I really do. But we'll see. Either way, let me know what y'all think below. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. This is John from the One Carolina Show. It will still and always be Keep Pounding.